session,
Well, it would be nice to go through this today, get a breath of fresh air, and then come back at it tomorrow again, because, what? We have a full thing tomorrow, Jamie? So you want it all, it needs to all be done today?
That's what I was told. That's what you wanted.
No, not in my email. Sorry, I had to defend it. This is really an important conversation, and maybe it's good to have part of it today, sleep on it tonight, and continue it tomorrow.
Well, one, it's a conversation. You want to settle the
No,
Let's
wait,
do it now.
Jamie, you know the schedule, you make a decision.
I don't know, is Randy here tomorrow and Tom?
we are both here
Okay.
till Sunday, yes.
Okay, well, you know that.
Well, my question about this is, you all have ideas and policy ideas and written down about how to do monetary reform.
Right.
That is absolutely, how do you say, mandatory to make America work again. You have to have some kind of monetary, can't do what it's doing. So what Randy and I would suggest, would like to have, is how you inject what we know into our end of the economy and tie it together with monetary reform, and eventually out of that, you're gonna come with some kind of political policy that you want somebody to pay attention to. Is that?
Yeah.
You don't wanna just talk to yourselves.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's fine, but it's not gonna go very far.
We do that a lot.
So, this is my question. Based on John's queries and everything, and what came from that was a discussion of, well, the cheap imports undercut the prices in our economy. And I know that Norm has an equity tariff which would control that,
Yes.
right? Can you talk
Yes.
about that?
I can talk about equity of trade as a policy, yes, regarding imports.
Yes, the first thing I wanted to say, though, is kind of summing up what Tom has talked about, and what we need to say is our observation at Norm, that money is a social institution. It is not an individual thing. Money doesn't make a difference to me. It makes a difference to Tom and me. It's social. It is something created. The issuer of the money has to be public because that is the source of its usefulness. Money is only good in exchange. And that's it. That's why the public needs to be in charge of it. It seems to me that is the strongest argument for it that can be made. To lay that off onto the shoulders of some expert means that you have failed your civic responsibility as a citizen to understand what it means to live here. So education is in order. So we'd be happy to help out with that education. What Parity Agriculture does is it regulates the value of money according to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 of the Constitution of the United States of America.
Well, can I ask another question?
No. Sue has a...
So,
No, you didn't answer
No.
my question about.
Oh, the equity of trade, right. I wanted to say.
Putting a few questions out and letting them sort them,
No, one question at a
prioritize.
time.
Equity of trade was the question, and what the observation has been amongst Wilkins' research and ours, a tariff is not a trade measure. A tariff, properly understood and implemented, is a monetary measure. It adjusts the difference in purchasing power between two currencies at the border on the valuation of the wealth that moves across the border. That's all it needs to do. It needs to make sure that the domestic purchasing power is not ruptured by the incoming currency valuation. And that's what a tariff needs to do. It needs to say, okay, this was produced with Chinese labor at $2 a day. In the United States, our labor is at $20 a day. Therefore, on bringing in X number of widgets, we lost from our labor pool X number of dollars, and therefore we need to charge a tariff on this lot of so much to recoup that, and so therefore that goes on as an additional impost on the valuation of these imports. And therefore what they will sell for in the store is now equalized to our domestic purchasing power. That is a tariff.
Let me add a practical application of that. Some years ago, when I worked in Washington for American Ag on the Hill, there was a big World Economic Conference at George Washington University, and my wife, it just gets irritated when I say this. Every touchy-feely on the planet was at this damn conference. Every left-winger and all the, and I'm not disparaging them. They were all there. And this was just so pointy-headed, it was beyond, I was frustrated because I'm a producer, I'm not an academic, and I'm not disparaging academics. They were lamenting over Latin America. Oh, it is just horrible in Latin America. We got to Guatemala. Oh my God, there's just poverty and they're hungry and all that. And I said, what do they do in Guatemala? Well, they grow bananas. Do you guys eat bananas? Oh yeah, every day. Are you willing to pay enough for your damn banana? No. No. They weren't.
No,
They want cheap bananas. So if we allow us to dictate that, that's not a market. Somebody has to establish some rules, or somebody is going to get all the money and everybody else is going to go hungry. That is not socialism to fix that. It's running a country according to the benefits of the people that live here. That so amazed me when I asked, are you willing to pay for the bananas? Not a hand went up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. If you look at, John, if you look at the bottom line of our what is parity, it just describes what is the equitable trade is.
Mike, you're on.
So my question has to do with subsidies. So the current model is for subsidies in agriculture, but also for the oil industry.
Right.
So the price of food then is directly dependent on the price of oil, which then is subsidized. And it also creates a situation where things like, industrial production of agricultural goods are then, the current system of having large-scale agriculture is incentivized with the subsidies. And it also allows for cheap shipping. So my question for you then is, with thinking in terms of parity as opposed to subsidy, would you then eliminate agricultural subsidies as opposed to price fixing? And I'm also interested in hearing your thoughts on the nature of subsidies, not only for agriculture, but also for oil subsidies, and how that would change the price of agricultural goods. Specifically like, beef and other things that would be exponentially more costly if we didn't have those oil subsidies.
I'll let Tom speak to some of this, particularly the cattle and the oil. However, the subsidy question is, my first comment on the subsidy thing is this. With agriculture being paid, let me say it this way, with agriculture being paid 31 cents for every dollar's worth of wealth delivered, how can any payment from the public treasury be considered a subsidy? And the effect of what's considered subsidy today to agriculture has absolutely no effect on the producer. It is simply a subsidy to protect the insurance company and the bank, and that's it. Now, oil and livestock, go ahead.
I'm not sure how the subsidies work for oil. I'm not real knowledgeable. I know policy is giving these guys a break. subsidy for agriculture is almost non-existent today. There's virtually no subsidy checks being written to farmers a subsidy ostensibly is to make up a shortfall of what the market didn't pay you.
Not even for soybeans?
No, there's no checks going, there's insurance.
There's disaster programs.
And there's some stuff they're talking about, and the stuff that Trump has just done, which is so minuscule, and I mean, to me, it's a joke. Here's something I think you probably don't know. Back in the 90s, there was a huge debate on all of the disaster programs for agriculture. They kept coming, it was a disaster here and a disaster there, and they needed help. So they put a permanent disaster program in place and federal crop insurance. Now, to participate in a farm program, you have to have federal crop insurance as a farmer. You don't get a choice. You're obligated to buy the damned insurance. The insurance, this is a strange thing. If you have a loss, you don't even see the check. They're not even bothering to have a farmer endorse it. It goes direct to the bank that financed his farm. It doesn't even go through their hands anymore. The part you don't know is the premium of insurance that is so bad, if a guy came to your house to sell it to you for insurance on your house, you would throw him off the porch. You're forced to buy it. And the taxpayer, you guys, pay 65% of the premium. Farmers pay 35%, and it's still too high, and they can't hardly collect. I've been involved in some stuff with crop insurance collection and suing insurance companies for several years. It's a joke.
You can't get there from.
It's a joke. It's a subsidy for insurance companies. It has nothing to do with, it's pathetic, you know?
So
But
Tom,
they've sold it to the public.
How do we get to parity then? We know subsidies aren't the answer. Then can you show us then how does parity work for us?
The way the parity worked from the 42 to 52 period, which was by policy, the other two parity periods popped up out of circumstance. The third period, 42 to 52, was produced by policy adopted by government, written by Carl Wilkin and his associates, sold to the Congress under the idea that they were scared witless following Pearl Harbor and had to do something because they'd been flat on their face for 13 years with an economic depression, and they just got militarily attacked and thumped right between the eyes. And they were scared witless. And Wilkin came in and sat down and said, look, if you do this, you will stand up the economy in 6 months' time on its own hind feet, and from that point you can begin to move forward. And it worked. It would work today.
I think what,
It
the program, how you talk about the
90
mechanics of the
Right,
program?
the mechanics of it were a 90% parity loan on the crop itself. It's called a non-recourse loan. In other words, the asset, the crop, is the sole collateral for the loan. And the parity price having been calculated beforehand, the 90%, the loan limit from the government is at 90% of that parity value for what you offer for sale. You can either take the loan or you can sell it to the elevator, whichever you want to do as the farmer. There's no forcing you to take the loan. But it also says that what I would say is that if I were to implement this today, I would say, I will offer this loan available to the producer on exactly the same crops that were produced the last time we had parity in 1952. That's no GMO corn, no GMO soybeans, no GMO cotton.
And there was no programs for livestock. The market took care of that.
The idea was that the bulk of agricultural production is encompassed in 5 basic storable commodities. If you regulate the income on those 5, it stabilizes the rest of agriculture, every other aspect of agriculture will find its own natural relationship to that stabilized core value. The rest of the economy will find itself self-regulating to this core earnings area. But because it comes first, because the miner eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the financier eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the doctor eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner, students eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 18 years before they're considered enough to kick out of high school. Much less 22 to get out of college or 27 to get a professional degree. So we have to feed, clothe, and house them up until that time, till they become producing members of our society, where they need to participate in the monetary circulatory scheme.
A strange aspect of the parity period was Jackson Street shut down. Commodity trading quit.
Yes.
There was nothing to trade.
During World
The
War II.
futures market shut down voluntarily.
From 1942 to
The reason that it works, once there was an establishment of the price,
the relationship. Yep.
and they said 90%, the law read that wheat, let's just pick wheat, cannot enter the marketplace for consumption at less than 90%. So if you were a wheat miller, you need to buy wheat to run your mill and create flour and sell to the baker. You couldn't get it.
Tell them about the 100%.
You had to pay
Call
90%, or you didn't get it
as a miller.
as a miller.
Right.
So as a farmer, all I had to do was offer it to you, and if you said no, the government would come and buy it
Right.
for 90%. And there, the law said they can't sell it to the miller for 80.
Nope.
So you had to pay it, like it or not.
As a miller.
You know, they never had to buy any.
Right.
The marketplace rose, because if you're a miller, you'll say, well, I'll buy it because I need to mill wheat and make flour, and I'll have to pay that, and I'll add that to my price.
The other thing
I mean, it was really simple. You know?
the loan itself, the 90% loan, is not called on a date certain in the future. It's called on a price in the marketplace. In other words, you offer, the government CCC man offers the 90% loan on cotton, 90% parity loan on cotton, and the farmer who takes that loan, the cotton goes under seal into the CCC storage area. When the market price hits 100% of parity, the CCC goes to the cotton producer and says, your loan is due. So he's either got to sell his cotton at 100% in the marketplace, pay back the 90% loan, and pocket his 10% earnings, or else he's got to come up with that 90% price that he took and pay it back to the government.
If you doubled the price of wheat today, the impact on a loaf of bread would be negligible.
It's about 3 cents of wheat.
It doesn't matter.
Double the
But
price.
to farm income, it would be like night and day. So it's a societal obligation. That's not a market that's working. I mean, somebody thinks this is a market working? There's no market. What market are you talking about?
I have one more question about subsidies and the nature of large-scale agriculture and how the subsidy programs affect the large-scale agricultural businesses, meaning that it incentivizes, in my understanding at least, and I appreciate your words about how really it's the subsidies aren't what we think they are.
Right.
They're much different in terms of
Yes.
who gets paid and when. But my question for you is, how do the subsidies influence the nature of farming itself, meaning that large-scale agribusiness then is incentivized over small-scale regenerative kinds of farming operations?
Well, I'd like Randy to answer part of that too. To me, the part of that is a modern myth that says big farmers are getting bigger because the government is treating them better via policy. No, banks are willing to lend to bigger operations. It's more market-driven on volume of production than it is on government programs. Even though government programs appear, I can't see where the guy that's farming 1,000 acres has less government involvement than the guy that's farming 50. I mean, am I saying this right, Randy? There's not real subsidies for small farmers that are taking place, and I don't see any that are giving big farms preference over small farms in the government programs. I think that's more of a myth.
Isn't there a volume requirement? So if the farmer produces a certain volume of a product, then they get the full stipend, or anyways, this is something that I heard, I don't know about.
No, I don't know. Not to my knowledge, there's never been anything like that. There's different programs that I'm not real familiar with. Sugar has a special program, cotton is a little different.
Can I ask a clarifying question? We always hear when they talk about the farm program and the money that will be spent, we always hear, oh, and besides, all that money goes to the big farmers, never to the small farmers. I think we're asking, what is that about? Where does that come from?
Yeah. Well, I think most of it comes from the understanding that all of those programs are administered through a lending agency, farm credit services. And under Greenstone in Michigan, we have a company called Greenstone Financial, which is not an agency of the federal government, but they represent the government when it comes to getting farm loans out there. So they are the agent in lieu of the agency of the USDA. It cuts down, it's a privatized bureaucracy that takes the government money and funnels it out the door. But what happens is that they want to protect their investment. In other words, the Greenstone wants to make sure that they don't get in too big a trouble with bad loans, and so they will continue to shovel money at somebody who's not doing well in order to keep their portfolio from looking too bad. So that's the bigness aspect.
I think I see where you're coming from. You're talking about that big farmers get more access to X, Y, and Z than small. That's just the nature of acres and bushels. If you have more acres that you're farming, the rate doesn't change. But if you are farming 10,000 acres and there's going to be a $15 an acre subsidy, you get $15 an acre on all of your land, where the guy that's, so it appears, and it's been played off by certain farm organizations for political purposes, to say that small farmers are being discriminated against. Sure as hell they are, they're not getting paid. And the big guys got bigger because they needed a bigger truck. You know, that's the whole thing that's been missing. You need a bigger truck, not more money. That's what my advocacy was in DC. Don't want a bigger truck, want to get paid. You know, I did this last week with my barber. Let's see if this, I'll try every way to try to make sense of this. We were having a discussion in the barber shop, and these guys were talking about the farm economy, because it's farm country. Oh, woe is us and all this stuff. And I said to the barber, I said, you're charging 21 bucks a head, right? Yeah, I presume that covers your rent, your taxes, the electricity that costs, and you can make a living. Yep. I said, if you were farming, you would now have to charge $7 a head for your hair, and you better get up at 6 o'clock and cut a hell of a lot more heads of hair and quit at midnight, because we're only getting 30% of what we should get. Would you like to run your barber business that way? We said, you can't. That's agriculture has done that by figuring out how to grow more bushels. That's the only choice there's been, is more, not better bushels either, by the way, as far as the quality of what's being produced on the farm. And most farmers don't want to be reminded that the quality of what they're growing has been deteriorating because they've been chasing money, not quality. And they don't have a choice. It just What are they supposed to do? You know, it's the nature of it, it's the absence of a sound policy by our government that takes care of this.
And the externalities that are produced as a result, you know, like agricultural runoff, for example.
Exactly.
Oh, all of those things are consequences of bad farm policy. And that's bad monetary and finance policy.
I have a couple of questions here. I was glad that you mentioned that Jackson Street, you referred to is this thing on?
Yeah.
The Board of Trade,
Right.
and, geez, it must have been like 20, 25 years ago, whatever. Anyway, quite a while ago, another lifetime ago, I worked at a restaurant, tended bar, near the Board of Trade. And it was something, because those were our regular customers. So, who sets the prices right now? The Board of Trade doesn't set the prices, the free market doesn't set the prices, and if we're to have parity, how would that be determined, what that price, who would set that? How would it become to that parity?
Arithmetic sets that price.
Yes.
Okay, well.
Not some government bureaucrat. It's a
Okay.
formula. It's a formula that's been worked out. The one they're using now is flawed on 2 counts. Doesn't matter. What the upshot of all this is that it's at 31% of parity today. As I said, it's been down so long it looks like up to me. A 10% improvement would be 3 points. That would be significant. That would go from 31 to 34. So, you know, and to move it to the lowest point of the 1930s depression, agriculture, as everybody has related, you know, why agriculture was demolished in the Great Depression. Well, the lowest point that parity dropped to during the Great Depression was in 1932, and the parity ratio was 52.
But it's lower now.
Today we are at 31.
So that wasn't the lowest period.
No.
And in fact, when the last recession that we had, well, the first recession we had under Reagan, 1983, 84, 85, 87, that was the point in time where we reached the same parity level as 1932.
You know, if I could just ask a little follow-up, make a comment. When the collapse hit in 2009,
Yeah.
I was at another bar then. I had a whole other, anyway, I was at another bar, and it was in Indiana, Maryville, Indiana. It doesn't exist anymore, they tore it down. But the Radisson Hotel there. And anyway, we had some people that came in and had their Christmas party every year.
Right.
And they came in from Rensselaer, which is like 50 miles south, farm country.
Right.
And they had a farm implement business, I can't remember, it was John Deere or whatever it was. And 2008, I mean, everybody was down in the dumps there, and you talk to your customers, and I say, geez, you're having a Christmas party, that's pretty good, aren't you guys really interested? I said, no, farmers are doing great right now, at least there. That's what they told me.
Right,
That
right.
they were selling lots of equipment and things were going good. So do you have any insight into that?
I do. Well, one of the things that was happening at the time, as the leveraged housing came apart, deleveraged, a lot of money in the stock market went looking for a safe haven. Some of it by hook and crook, and illegal means, by the way, was found to get some of it into the futures, agricultural commodity futures markets, which raised the price, by the way, of agricultural commodities for about 2 years. And put about, ran it up to, I think we got almost to 40%, 42 on the parity ratio. So ran it up like 10 points. Which gives, and as that money runs through the economy, it turns over, the multiplying effect turns that agricultural earnings, no interest associated with it, for debt. And so those earnings turn over multiple times and gave the impression that we were recovering from the housing crisis quickly. That was what all that talk was about. What happened was that the futures market in those agricultural commodities is so short-term that it cashed out, came out of the market, and never went back in because everybody heard we were improving. We're safe now.
Go back to the stock market.
Well, it's the tail that wags the dog. The market, the futures, I have some experience with the commodity markets. When I was in the ranching business, I decided that that was one of the salvations of becoming an industrial agriculture guy was trade futures. So I registered as a large trader because I was handling so much volume. I had to register as a large. I had 1% of all the feeder contracts in the nation at one time. My son has asked me over and said, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. I said, it's real simple. The futures market is me buying something I'm never going to get and selling something I can never have. And he said, that's impossible. You're right. But when I was a boy in the country elevators, which bought all the grain, and they were all usually families, and some were big, and Cargill and Continental, and they had some. They had a chalkboard. Every morning they erased it, and they put on, in our country, the Minneapolis price of wheat from the Minneapolis market. In 25 years, that's all changed. The only posted price is the futures market price, not the cash. So the tail is wagging the dog. The futures market controls the cash market, not the way it's supposed to work. Now, I don't know in oil if that's true, but in agriculture commodities, that is absolutely true. The futures market controls the cash price, which that means you've allowed speculators to control the entire market. Why would you do such a thing? Why would you allow a speculator to have control of your marketplace? We have done that.
Capitalism.
Joe's next.
Okay, go ahead.
Randy, did you have something you wanted to say there?
Well, I was going to,
Is this working?
Yeah.
Mike?
yes, I was going to read from this 1938. That's 81 years ago. 81 years ago, Mr. Carl Wilkin was essentially asked the same question about futures markets. And the question from the floor says, I understand you are meeting with some success with big businessmen. This is to Mr. Wilkin. Wilkin, some, yes. And you have another group. For example, I had a meeting with the board of directors of the Chicago Board of Trade on this very program that we have. Here is what I told them. I said, now, if you can't operate on a margin of 1 cent a bushel, let's make it 2, 3, 4, or 5. But handle actual grain. We do that with livestock. We don't sell steers on the future market. We don't sell automobiles on the future market. We don't sell dress goods on the future market. We sell actual cattle, actual hogs. Why not sell actual bushels? To give you an experience just how that has been used, how I say it can affect you, in 1937, in the spring, the Department of Agriculture estimated 80 million acres of wheat. But today, we pick up the records of the grain companies like James Bennett and Bartlett Fraser and the Department of Agriculture, and the acreage is down to 66 million. What became of the 14 million acres? The point is that there's, on the futures market, here in Chicago at least, they are not restricted in the amount of bushels that can be traded to discover the proper price for wheat. They can trade as many bushels of wheat as they want to discover the true price of wheat.
You're saying unrelated to how many bushels there are?
Unrelated.
What are you talking about? We're discovering the price of wheat here.
In general, annually, we trade 10 times more bushels of corn than exists.
Wow.
That's annual, that's been for 30 years. What Randy said about 1938, now the commodities you mentioned that Wilkin was, we trade all of them on the futures market.
They're all
Cattle,
livestock.
hogs,
Yep.
carcasses,
Yep.
feeder cattle, they're
Yep.
all traded on the futures
Yep.
market. I mean, that's what sets the market. We don't do housing that way, although you can trade housing.
We've suggested that the proper way to approach this problem is by making the big board more inclusive. I want lawyers' salaries on the big board. I want doctors' salaries on the big board. I want university professors on the big board.
Appendectomies. Why not? I mean, if it's reasonable to trade wheat, why wouldn't it be reasonable to put my daughter's salary as a nursing professor on the board traded every 5 seconds? And at the end of the day, that's what you get. I mean, doesn't that make sense?
Absolutely.
It's not very popular, let me tell you.
Okay, so I have, if I could, have 2 questions, okay? One goes to Randy, and it goes to the issue of whether or not having a parity program results in a cost to the government and the taxpayers or not. So that's my question for Randy. And my question for the North Dakota goes, well, the description that you gave of relative to the land markets and all of that, and they're down in Washington now trying to get a subsidy because we've peaked out on the ability of them to manipulate land prices. You know, they're peaked out. Is that true everywhere? That's really my question on that part. But Randy, on the parity front.
The second part, I think in general it's true. It's more true there because of the level of leverage that's been occurring from some poor crop years where there wasn't, the simple equation, production times price equals income. So how many bushels you have times the price equals your income. If you're suffering a shortage of bushels and income, or a price, the income level gets pretty low. That's been made up with this land inflation. I think almost everywhere in rural America this is going on.
Okay.
I don't know if it's as bad because I don't have as much familiarity with the land in Texas as I do in the Intermountain region, the place where I was in the cattle business. It has far outstripped anything that I ever imagined could take place.
Thank you.
There has to be an end to that. A friend of mine that's been in trouble several times farming has figured out the monetary and the farming stuff. He had a quarter that was his grandfather's homestead. It was 2 miles from his house. We have some beginning farmer programs that are eyewash to make it look good. You know, we've got to take care of it and get some young farmers back in. He sold this quarter that he says is worth maybe $100 an acre for $1,675 an acre. I take the money.
Yeah, as far as cost, does parity operation cost the government or the people of the United States? The way parity is calculated, properly calculated, the question itself becomes absurd because what it does is it relates the state of the arts of production and processing with the available labor and the new wealth produced, so that making the production from first wealth through processing, through consumption, is all covered without the need for debt. So essentially, parity describes that point in balance, in dynamic equilibrium, where costs are minimized at every step of the way.
Because of no debt?
Well, not only because of no debt, but because the exchangeability between the segments of the economy is the goal of the pricing scheme.
Okay.
So in other words, each segment, the transportation segment, the finance segment, the service segment, the agricultural segment, the industrial segment, the processing segment, are all able to exchange their production, the wealth they insert into the economy, with all the other segments on a dollar for dollar basis.
Right.
Everybody's dollar is 100 cents. Right now, it doesn't work, and we have to build up these giant deficits and debts because agriculture's dollar is only worth 31 cents. And when that particular dollar is only worth 31 cents, you have to put 69 cents of debt in to make it work. That was what I was trying to get at with these numbers at the end that I told you about. 1 part in 20, I told you. The public debt was 22 trillion. The personal debt listed here that I used was 15.63. That's $37.63 trillion of debt. And the cumulative shortage of gross farm income was 39.6. $2 trillion difference. We could have bought the whole thing and had $2 trillion left over today if we'd have paid agriculture since 1953. We wouldn't have had to borrow a dime. We'd have $2 trillion of surplus in our budget, in our treasury.
I think there's some suggestions.
It doesn't cost, it produces.
In a book that's quoted oft lately, the Bible, you can't cheat your way to prosperity. And that's what we've been doing. We've been cheating our way to give the illusion of prosperity when all of us look around wherever you're from. And if you can be objective, you can notice a class, a group of people that's growing that don't have anything. People that are on the edge of poverty in every community in the nation. They're appearing, they're showing up. And we have explanations for it. We have rationalizations, character, all kinds of things we rationalize. But those are the consequences of what you're talking about here. A failed policy that can distribute the wealth equitably amongst the people that do the work. We're not doing that. To me, I like examples of things. My wife and I have been on Social Security for a while, and we've had some health issues. The health industry in America separated itself in a way that's very strange. There's if you think about this, a disconnect between the consumer's ability to pay and the price of the service. There's no connection. Because if you price medical services according to people's ability to pay, it would be an awful lot less. But they have an incentive because they're going to get paid by the insurance company. This is an example that I think is relevant. My wife and I's prescription bill annually, and we have some health issues, I'm a transplant recipient of that, is 2.5 times what our gross Social Security check is combined. For our prescription meds. Is that rational? Is that sound like a sound economic system that's working? There's no relationship between the prices we're paying and our ability to pay. And there's no relationship to the cost of making those products and the prices that are being charged. They're what the market will bear, and the government supports it.
So if I could follow up your description of the I'm going to call it the economic financial banking situation in North Dakota, where they can no longer appreciate the value of the land in order to get further leverage. And these guys are in Washington, and they're sort of demanding some kind of a solution, because if this thing topples, et cetera, et cetera. Why aren't they there asking for parity pricing for their products?
That's price fixing. We can't fix
parity.
prices.
Okay.
That's an interference in the free market. It is. It literally is. And they believe that the bank is the center of the community and they have to be saved, and the guys that are depositors don't mean a damn thing.
Yeah, they think money comes before wealth.
I had a friend that was a troubleshooter for no longer an existent bank, Norwest Bank, which is now Wells Fargo. He was a troubleshooter. And this is what he said. His specialty was workouts on farm loan problems, and he worked all across several. He was really good at it. Hated lawyers. Because lawyers discovered, according to this guy, he said, when you're a lawyer, you gotta pick a client with the right last name. B-A-N-K is a good one. Because no matter what you charge, you'll get paid. So he said, the damn lawyers were costing Norwest Bank millions of dollars because they were doing excessive stuff, so he was the workout specialist. And here's what he did. He said, every day, he was a good Sherman boy, every day in North Dakota, the eagle flies for Norwest Bank. That meant government guarantees he could manipulate so that when the guy went belly up, the bank got their money and the customer got gone.
Right.
The bank covered their butt. He said, we're not taking the losses. So much for free enterprise. But how, I said, well, those are 90%, 80 to 90% guarantees or programs. So he said, bullshit. We do 130% guarantees. We cook the books high enough, they don't know. So we get more money back than we could ever get in the marketplace. The taxpayers are generous. That's what they're proposing right now as we speak in Washington to do that same thing.
Sure.
Well, my question kind of follows what has just come up here, and that was as I was listening to you with the idea of setting prices, and that's what parity is.
Calculating price.
And setting them and with a
Putting a floor under the new well.
So in a sense, it's a kind of a price setting.
But it's a monetization, yeah.
Right, yeah. And, it strikes me that we talk about needing to have a monetary system that maintains its value, that
Constant
doesn't
purchasing power.
losing its value as we have now.
Correct.
And of course, this may be a naive thing to say, but if you set prices for everything, that would make sure that the prices stay constant.
Yeah,
And
but
that's essentially sort of price controls over everything.
No.
And something doesn't sound right about that.
Okay.
What is it?
Okay. Well, I don't know for sure what it may be for you. Other folks have approached this from the same concern. And what they fail to understand about this particular approach is that it is based, the prices are calculated according to a mathematical formula all the time, or every month, whatever, they're published every month. But because the costs of labor and capital in the rest of the economy are moving, then the prices that get calculated based on those are moving. So it's not a fixed price. It's a calculated price based upon the requirements of the rest of the economy. The point being that agriculture is the leader. As like I said before, even a student has to be fed for 18 years before they turn into a useful citizen. So we've got agriculture has an 18-year investment in that human being.
Right. Yeah.
That's a social value that needs to have some utility recognized as being attached there.
So how the parity price is set,
Right.
I presume I can look up somewhere. Is that right in terms of
Yeah.
this, or is
Yeah,
is it in the stuff that you handed
No,
out?
no, it's not. You can go to our website
Okay.
for the citation. On our NORM website, www.normeconomics.org. There's a menu in the upper left-hand corner. There's one of the items there is called New Stuff. Click on that. First thing you see on the New Stuff page is the parity, extracts of the parity chart published by USDA.
Month to month, they change.
Yep,
It's
they're
by law.
published every month. But at the heading of that chart, it says, parity prices are calculated according to law, and they give the legal citation. So then you can look up in your reference to the US code, find out Yep, what those formulas are. Now, they've fiddled with this formula since 1946, 47, they've fiddled with this formula time and time and time again. But the biggest problem that I have with the formula they use now, two concerns. One of them is they use sliding parity as policy, saying that in years of, they don't implement any of this, but it's nonetheless in the law. In years of big crops, full crops, will run the parity loan rate at 60%. In years of short crops, we'll run the parity loan rate at 90%, which is precisely opposite what needs to happen. In short crops, the price will go up on its own. So we don't need a 90% mandate in a short crop year. We need a 90% mandate in a big crop year, so that the earnings stay there and we capture those earnings and circulate it around the economy. But anyway, and the second problem I have with it is they've instituted what they call a rolling base period. So that every 10 years, they simply draw a line across the numbers and say, well, that was 100%, let's go for the next 10 years. Well, no, it may have been 100%, it may have been 80%. You know, they are required now to calculate two ways. One, according to what they call the 1910 to 14 base, and the other on the rolling parity base. And you'll find both sets of numbers published. But the parity price chart listed in there is essentially the 1910 to 14 base period. And they tell you how they calculate an adjusted base price figure, and then how they assemble the index numbers, and how they multiply the adjusted base price times the ratio of the index numbers. It's all in there. You can go look it up. It's crooked. It's stupid. Well, it's been written and modified by people who don't understand what we need to accomplish here. You know, these figures in well, I guess that's a piece of paper back there, but you know, what we're looking for is for everybody's dollar should be 100 cents. You know, I don't want yours to be 31 cents and mine to be $30. I mean, that's essentially what we've had for some time, is at the housing deleveraging. We saw people leveraged at 40 to 1. 30 to 1 was nothing. You know, if a bank is leveraged at 30 to 1, and a farmer is at 30 cents on the dollar, that's a 100 to 1 ratio of advantage. Farmer has a 1/10, and the banker has 10 times. 10 times 10 is 100. That's 100% advantage. You ever play a little game, what they used to call it, where they stand around in a circle and you just try to do the trading game? If you got 10 people and you got 10 chits, and one person has a 10% advantage.
Musical chairs?
Oh, well, sort of like it. But as you go your trades, with a 10% advantage, all it takes is 10 turns for one person to wind up with all the chips. At 100 to 1 advantage, it takes one turn.
I found it interesting. Vince Rossiter owned a bank in Nebraska. That was how his got to the raw material economic stuff. And I was in his bank a lot, a little country bank, and he had walls covered with charts and graphs and papers. He could predict the gross, not domestic product, GDP. None of us believe in the GDP. It's gross national income. He could predict within 1% 6 months in advance, every year. And he did it with measuring.
Sure.
He was sort of friends with Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett would come up and study the charts and kept telling Vince, I don't believe in your theories, but I'm not going to take a chance and not know about it. So Warren Buffett is a speculator. He's a trader. He's a money guy. Vince was a producer. There's a difference.
You know, Buffett studied under Benjamin Graham.
Oh yeah, he studied under Benjamin Graham. That's where Buffett got all of his ideas.
Graham's book, I don't know if you've read it. You know Benjamin Graham?
No.
He wrote a book called Storage and Stability.
Yeah, in the 30s.
Yeah. And he laid out an entire program for essentially describing another approach to what was called the ever normal granary.
Because of how the Chinese and the ancient Incas ran their economies, they were smart.
Yep.
We're not very smart here, you know, because again, I think we've allowed speculators, money manipulators, con men to control the economy rather than people that produce. It's backwards. Yeah.
And we contend that you can have all that you want, and what goes away first is the money. The money will go away because it is nothing. What is it Sadi said? Money is the nothing you get for something before you can get anything. Money is nothing. It's wealth that matters. And money is not wealth. And wealth is not money. And if you think that I just lied, prove it. I dare you.
Okay.
Other question?
There's a, I'm sorry, Mike's going, there's some people who need a comfort break and want
Yes.
to take a break at some point.
I won't.
So, let's get one last quick question.
You shall be uncomfortable for a few moments.
The queue still goes on. So,
All right.
we have to have a decision.
I'll make this quick. So you made reference to the 15 million subsistence farmers in Mexico that were displaced as a result of this sort of takeover of agriculture. Yeah, right. So obviously we have the term banana republic, how we have sort of intervened in other nations for agricultural purposes.
We've supported the companies that did that.
Exactly, yes. So could you say a few words about, international economic policy regarding agriculture? Is that something that's like a sort of a defense strategic analysis position where they consider the kinds of resources that are being developed in other nations and actively try to interfere or disrupt those activities?
Manipulate.
You know, it's a great question. I don't have really good answers. I suspect that we don't want, well, other than in Brazil. Brazil, those are all Americans from Texas that developed the JBS beef and are deforesting to grow beans and corn and feed cattle and bring them up here and wreck the market. I knew some of those guys in Dumas, Texas. They were smart guys, and they got the political system to cooperate with them to do that. We should never let any of that meat into this country. I think the powers that be want us to keep agriculture dominated. I don't think we want development around the world. I think we want to do it here. As the industrial model, one thing that they're going to have trouble with, cattle can't be industrialized like other parts of agriculture. It's not possible. Cattle cannot be industrialized. Hogs were, chickens were, wheat is industrialized. Cattle require feet and hands on the ground, hands there, and there's a limit to what a human can do physically. They cannot industrialize beef production. And I think we're fortunate that that's true.
Tried.
Oh, it's been tried over. I tried.
The gestation period. Gestation period.
Oh, yes, there was a move in Congress some years ago when there was some talk about beef, and one congressman, I think from Virginia, tried to make a law, said, well, it takes so long for cattle to be produced. He wanted to pass a law to change the gestation period for cows. That's the thinking process that goes on. We have an industrialized system in pork and chickens. In cattle, we do at the consumer end with giant feedlots producing virtually all of the meat. But the raw material has to be produced on individual. My judgment and experience in this for a lifetime is once you get to around 700 or 800 cows on a ranch, you need more labor. It doesn't work well. There's some really well-managed big ranches with a lot more, but it's not sustainable. So.
I just want to add